This is a remake of a video that I made earlier in the week. I was talking to a friend of mine last night and recounting the unhappiness that the earlier video caused. And he asked me, he said, well, what are these people's concern? I said, well, they're concerned about the voltage and the amperage in the ignition coil, the ignition circuit. He said, are they concerned about the minimum or the maximum? I said, they're concerned about the maximum. And he said, well, just use the max feature on your voltmeter. And I have to admit, I have never used this feature on my voltmeter. I've never needed to. But what it does is when you select that max setting, it causes the meter to remember the maximum reading that it has taken. Even if subsequent readings are lower, it will continue to display the maximum. It's kind of like a compression gauge. You know how when you're doing a compression test, the needle starts lower, and then as you crank the engine, it gets higher and higher and higher and higher. And you eventually, reach a point where the needle will stop moving. It has the maximum pressure that it's ever going to register. And then there's a check valve, that holds the pressure inside the gauge until you release it. And that max setting on the meter is kind of the same deal. So I'm going to remake the video from earlier in the week, but I'm going to use the max feature on my meter, so the readings will be the maximum readings. And as before, we're starting on battery voltage here. Remember, I run full system voltage through my coil, which is the source of all the unhappiness. But it's not a Bosch Blue coil. It is a Pertronix 1.5 ohm coil. And if you read the data sheet that comes with the coil, it explicitly says that the coil is suitable to operate at full system voltage. I mean, it's in black and white. It comes with the coil. So as before, that is charging system voltage now going into my coil, coming off the alternator. So now I'm going to hit the max button. It says max on the display. And you'll notice the voltage is creeping up minimally, 0.01 volts. But it's remembering the maximum voltage that's going into my coil. That is the maximum voltage going into my coil. So now, let's take a look at the amperage going into my coil. And I should point out that I've got the Bosch module plugged in right now. I have two ignition modules in my car. I have the Ford DuraSpark module and I have the original Bosch ignition module. And so right now, for all these measurements, I got the Bosch module plugged in. So the only difference between my ignition and stock ignition right now is the coil and then voltages going into the coil. So on the battery, I've got about 5 amps going into the coil. I haven't hit the max button yet because this is going to go down. As soon as the engine starts, this is going to drop. Then I'll hit the max button. So that's amperage going into my coil. Then I've hit the max button. So this is going to show the maximum amperage going into my coil while the engine is running. And if the amperage was to jump up, it would show it on the display. But it appears to have maxed out at 3 amps. So now, let's repeat that over on the negative side of the coil. Repeat these 2 measurements that we just took. So, while we're on the battery, the negative side of my coil is seeing just a hair less than 2 volts. I had an explanation of why there's voltage on the negative side of the coil, even though the ignition system isn't operating, the engine's not turning. Nobody liked my explanation, so, so be it. Whatever explanation you want to use, there's about 2 volts on the negative side of my coil. So you hit the max button, we'll start the engine, and this will remember the maximum voltage on the negative side of the coil. Now, one of the Facebook users cautioned. He says, if you're looking at an average reading on the negative side of the coil there. I said, well, we're average kind of people. Just average DeLorean owners using our average tools. We're not scientists. We don't need scientific tools. We're just, looking at the average voltage on the negative side of the coil, 8 volts. So now, let's take a look at the amperage on the negative side of the coil. By the way, there was a fella who said that his coil got hot as a firecracker, or I forget what analogy he used, but he was reporting that his coil got fantastically hot. I mean, my coil is warm. Not quite as warm as a cup of coffee, but it's not, meltingly hot. So here's amperage on the negative side of my coil. You notice it's basically the same as the positive side. And it's going to go down when I start the engine. So I'll start the engine and then hit the max button. now we're looking at maximum amperage on the negative side of the coil. I've got the max feature engaged, so this is showing the maximum amperage on the negative side of the coil. So, and like I told you, it's like a compression gauge. It remembers that until you hit the max button. So that is the maximum voltage and maximum amperage that my meter, for whatever it's worth, it's the exact same meter that my friend has, and it's theoretically every bit as good as a fluke. It's supposed to be kind of a generic fluke. So those are the maximum amperage and maximum voltage measurements that this meter has taken on my ignition.